If I can have your attention, Eunice, let it have. This is a very important day. It's, for me personally, it's a very important day to commemorate the lives of the Achill people that drowned on this day 130 years ago. And I'm sure there isn't anyone in the crowd that didn't have a relation or somebody belonged to them on the boat. You know, I had a relation. He had to give testimony in the court about what happened. His name was Edward Gannon, or Ned Gannon as he was called. But just to say how wonderful the people were to go to Scotland, you could imagine it yourself at 13 and 14 years of age, to go to Scotland, away from their people, we'll say, to pick potatoes for the summertime. You know, and maybe they might be asked to stay on for the late harvest. That depended. If they were good, they were asked. But on that particular day, they left Darby's Point in Achill to go to meet the steamer in Westport. And Padraigh is going to tell you all about that. But I am so proud to stand here today, 130 years later, as an Achill person, really and truly, to commemorate the lives of these people. Really, I could not, when Father John was talking about it, because we're having, and later on we're having blessing at the, and a laying of wreaths at the quay at 5:30. But when Father John mentioned it, I couldn't let it go by, because I'm so proud of where I've come from, and so proud of the people I came from, really and truly. So it's a great privilege to be with Padraigh as well here today, and Padraigh has done a book on it, and he has several books written, but one in particular, I think it's a fiction book based on it. So the ceremony here today is going to be broken in 3 sections. We'll have Padraigh giving his talk for about 20 minutes, and then there'll be a question and answer, or 25 minutes, Padraigh, whatever.
Actually 40.
40, whatever, okay, 40, we'll allow that. And then there'll be a question and answer afterwards. Then we're going to have the sounding of the bell for all the names that was lost at sea that day. And then we're going to have, Michael O'Grady is going to sing a song or say a poem as well. And that'll be our ceremony here. And then later out at the quay they're going to be doing a blessing, and the Clew Bay pipe band are going to be there as well. And I think there's some nibbles and stuff like that in the towers afterwards, because I was informed that the man who has the towers now, his great grandfather was on the boat. So it's wonderful to see the connections, you know. So without further ado, I'll give you Padraigh. I have enough said. So you're very welcome to Westport Library.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the 17th century, in the barony of Erris, in the parish of Kilcommon, in the townland of Inver, an old woman was paying her rent to a landlord's agent. She did not possess the full rent due, and the agent said to her, "You will have to get a guarantor for you." The woman replied, "God will be my guarantor." "I'm afraid," said the agent, laughing, "you will have to get someone more earthbound than God." In the queue was Brian Rua O'Caravan. He intervened and said he would pay the woman's rent. And from that moment, Brian Rua was blessed with the gift of prophecy. He prophesied the coming of paper money. I quote, "A halfpenny candle will burn all the money in the country." He prophesied the coming of the telegraph system. News will travel on the tops of poles faster than a hawk will fly from Dublin to Blacksod Bay. And he prophesied carriages on wheels with smoke and fire will come to Achill, and the first and last carriages will carry dead bodies. Over 200 years later, on the 14th of June 1894, 130 years ago this very day, a hooker named Victory, skippered by John Healy from Corran, sailed from Darby's Point, Lochmore, Achill Island, to rendezvous with the steamer the Elm, anchored just outside Westport Quay. The hooker was built to carry a maximum of 30 passengers, but it is now carrying 126 passengers, and the majority of the 126 were young teenagers. The fare was 6 pennies to Westport, and 5 shillings from Westport to Glasgow. They were, in their innocent eyes, going on a big adventure to Scotland's potato fields. And when the hookers sailed for Clew Bay, they were singing and laughing as teenagers in their excitement always do. They were repeatedly warned by the skipper John Healy and his brother Padraigh not to move from where they were seated on board and in the hold, as the Healys had removed the ballast and the passengers were to be the ballast. It was a beautiful June day and the sea was calm, so stability would not be a problem if the passengers sat still. And this glorious June the 14th day was the reason the Healys took a chance on removing the ballast in order to accommodate more passengers. They did this not out of greed, but because the potato pickers waiting were desperate. Why were they going in such numbers? The Tatty Hawkers potato pickers were going to Scotland to earn the money to pay the seed rate and to prevent the bailiff from taking their cattle or sheep or any other valuables they possessed in lieu of payment. The seed rate came into existence when their potato crop had failed, and they had to eat the potatoes they reserved for seed to avoid starvation. The government received reports of starving people and gave them seed potatoes to crop their land. The seed rate was a government tax, and it had to be paid, or goods or animals equaling the amount owed would be seized by the seed rate collector. And when the seed rate collector entered a village to seize payment, he would be supported by large numbers of police. And to make sure the money was collected, the local government board would pressure the Board of Works, who in turn would pressure the Westport Guardians, who in turn would pressure the seed rate collector, and he with the sheriff and police would harass the people, and the seed rate collector made their lives a misery. The seed rate collector would seize sheep, cattle, maybe a boat, and these would be auctioned, and the collector would receive a commission. And the people had a warning system for the village to alert them when the seed rate collector arrived. A whistle would echo through the village, continued by each cabin, and the people would hide their beasts under cliff faces or in other places, and cabin doors would be barricaded, and often boiling water would be thrown at the seed rate collector. And when the collector was satisfied and left, a jaunty whistle would echo to signal the danger had passed. The Tatty Hawkers, potato pickers, were signing up for hardship in all weathers, when their hands would bleed, their bodies ache. And I would like to read 2 extracts from my novel, Only the Stones Never Die, to give you an insight into the hardship involved in picking potatoes on a hot June day and on a cold summer's day. We head for the field. The birds are slowly beginning their morning songs. The sky is faintly visible and is totally blue. It is going to be a scorcher. The field is huge. The drills stretch away into the distance. The digger has his grape ready. He throws up the first stalk, and the potatoes lie adrift on the soil like little islands on an ocean. I am now on my knees dragging 2 baskets along. One is for the big ones and the other for the small ones. And transferring the potatoes to the baskets is very painful after about 100 repetitions. The digger is working now to a rhythm, and I am struggling to keep up. My fingernails are cracked and beginning to bleed, and at 9 o'clock we have a break for dinner. I do not want to go out to the field again. I am exhausted. The sun is high in the sky. Gaffer hands me a large neck scarf to protect the back of my neck from the sun. I grab 2 bags for around my knees. I go out tired and weary to face my enemy, the sun. The digger says, "Hurry up, Galler, you need to keep up." I have Dada's stone in my pocket. I rub it and it gives me the strength to keep going. The sun is merciless. The soil is hot and crusting. Crawl, crawl, reach out and take that potato and another one. Thrust them into the basket. Keep moving. Whatever you do, keep moving, keep reaching, keep trusting, and keep dragging the baskets along. My hands are slowly ripped by stone fragments. The baskets are full, and I must stand up to empty them into a barrel. My body aches all over. Gaffer sends out water. I drink it like a man possessed of a giant thirst. I return with my empty baskets, and I start the ritual again. My torture comes to an end after 11 hours. The digger walks away. What a change outside. It is dark and wet. There is a cold northwest wind. I am hoping Gaffer will postpone the picking, but no. I troop out the field. The rain is coming in sheets. I am wet through before I pick my first potato. The soil is now mucky, and everywhere the digger stands, there is a pool of water after him. I'm sloshing through muck on my knees. Reach, gather, trust, and move. Reach, gather, trust, and move. My eyebrows are covered in muck. My hands are cold and numb. And every minute I'm waiting for Gaffer to shout, "Leave it for today." But all is silence. Just the sound of the wind coming in from the sea, the sound of heavy drops on the baskets, the sound of the digger's sloshing feet. And we work like this for 11 hours. So, the tatty hokers would experience racist chants and sexual abuse. They would be called dirty criminal Irish. The most popular expression used was Irish pigs. They would be accused of bringing disease. Typhus was known as Irish fever, and some shops would not serve them. Ní bheadh más madra orú. They haven't a dog's respect for you. And in shops they would hear, Luke na pingani, be amwe. You hired fellows, get outside. Their gaffer would give them a list of shops to avoid. And when they reached their sleeping quarters, the stench of cow dung was overpowering. They lived in cow byres. Their bed was a wooden potato box, and their mattress a bag of straw. They often shared accommodation with vagrants, slum dwellers, and prostitutes. Their gaffer would hang a screen of sacking across the byre to separate the men from the women. They would use a cold tap over a cattle trough for washing. The gaffer would open cesspits in the ground for sanitation. Toilet paper was grass, ferns, moss, or water. Rats were a constant threat. Rats ate their food, chewed their buttons and their clothes. In one season, a gaffer killed 1,500 rats. The potato merchants would contact a gaffer in Achill to form a squad of 30 tacky hokers, and these would be mostly neighbours and relations. Achill squads were popular because they were quiet in their ways and hard working, and they were contracted to arrive in Ayrshire on a certain date to pick the early Ayrshire potatoes. Now there were evil and corrupt gaffers, and I would like to read about Gaffer Bevan. And in this extract, a grape is a 3-pronged fork, and the word, Scottish word bobby, means penis. Okay? Now, this is the perspective of Kate Grealis from Keel Village, a tatty hoker, from Horiston Farm in Maidens. Fieldwork for women results in a loss of self-respect, tends to coarseness of manners, encourages strong passions, rough language, and general loudness. It makes them bold, coarse, rude, and wild. It is destructible of all tidy housewifery ways. So said a church elder in the 19th century. The girl is lying on a bag of straw in a cow stall. There is a smell of cow dung, and rain is coming through a hole in the roof. 2 women are holding her head and shoulders. Her legs are splayed wide apart, and 2 women are standing there telling her to push. She is 17 years old, 7 months gone, and about to have her baby. The women are telling her to push, and that the baby is ready to draw up. The girl is from Glasgow. Her face is contorted with pain. A woman shouts, "I'll see the head!" A baby cries out in the foul-smelling, dingy body, a clarion cry of hope. Only there is no hope for this baby. The girl cannot afford to keep her child, and if she attempts to do so, they both will starve. She will be alienated by society and censured by any employer. She lies there exhausted, her hair wet and her son lying on her chest, and this will be the last time she will look at her son or hold him. The gaffer Bevan is forcing sexual favours from her and threatening to hurt her if she does not consent. He hands her a piece of paper. It is an advertisement for adoption, and all present understand what the advertisement really means. A woman will take the infant for the sum of money, and no questions will be asked. The infant will be fed watered down milk laced with lime and drugged on laudanum, and after a short few days the baby will die from malnutrition. The coffin will be an old newspaper wrapped around the infant, and the burial ground will be a deserted spot or a river. All problems resolved. and the gaffer Bevan can continue to exert his power over this girl. Only now she owes him a financial debt because the baby farmer charged £12 to adopt. And this is a huge sum of money, and Gaffer Bevan intends to have it paid back in 6 instalments. I wake during the night to a rustling movement across my breast. I think, rat. I put out my hand hurriedly to shove it away. I touch a rough hand. It is a human rat. Gaffer Bevan is kneeling over me and whispering, I dinna like to see you lonely. Get down on the flare till I get in top of you. Do you ken? I whisper, let me get off my bedstead first. He steps back whispering, I'll give you a few drops of my Scottish blood. I know my grape is near me against the stone wall. I grab it before he has time to realise what is happening. I prod him forcefully with the grape. I will stick you in your bobby if you touch me, you dirty, smelly bastard. He makes a dive for me, and I stick him hard. The body is in commotion. Some are laughing, others are shouting, Stick his bobby! Stick his bobby! And Gaffer Bevan is lying on the floor, holding his privates and roaring, You're dead, Greedus! You're dead, Irish pig! The Achill gaffers minded their squads. They cared for them and guided them as best they could. And they marched their squad to Mass every Sunday. And they were guardians of the squad's rights. And they would distribute the weekly wage. And those going for the first time were called Grissini, a word denoting beginner. And I'd like to read about a good and decent Achill gaffer. And this is Gaffer Kilban. Today is a mild December day. We bury Gaffer with full tatioker honours. The men in their black waistcoats marching on one side of the cart bearing his coffin, their grapes held high in the air. The women in their white shirts and red petticoats marching on the other side, carrying potato gathering baskets. As Gaffer is lowered into his final resting place, I think of all the bothies he labours in, the knowledge he garners throughout his life, the dangers he learns about. I see him in the fields from Girvan to the Lothians, orchestrating the squad's work. How many rats does he kill? How many cesspits does he open? How many dividing cloths does he hang? How many times does he move his makeshift bed to avoid the rain coming through the roof of the bothy? How many bothy floors are spit on? How many bothy floors are danced on, raising the poisonous dust? How many Cayleys does he sing at? How many Grissini does he protect, advise and guide? I look away and note the December colours in the earth, a sky pearl white pockmarked with blotches of blue, a paler, cooler blue that December reveals, and each cloud rose tinted in the light of the December sun. Clouds never the same twice. Although mild, the north wind carries a whiff of frost, the fresh dark brown earth tumbling down onto his coffin. Goodbye, Gaffer, until we meet again. You were so good to your people. A fleet of 4 hookers left Achill on the 14th of June. Patton's hooker, Kilban's hooker, and the hooker skippered by James Fadden and Victory. And 3 were carrying 70 passengers each. And Healy, with the largest hooker, was carrying 126. And here's a thought. If the largest hooker was built to only carry 30 passengers, then the other hookers were also seriously overcrowded. In my novel, I tell the story from different character perspectives, and the following is what happened. And this is from the perspective of Kate Grealis. Just bear with me for a moment now. As the boat approaches Westport, Patrick Healy starts collecting the 6-penny fare, and this causes a disturbance among the passengers, and they begin to move from where they are seated. And then someone shouts, "Fare! Fare! Look at the big ship!" And suddenly everyone rushes to one side of the boat. Healy starts to scream. His brother starts to scream. "Sit down, will you sit down?" But it is all too late. Before I know it, I am in the water. My clothes are pulling me down. I undo my dress and begin to swim. I am pulled into a rescue boat. And then I see Owen struggling. He goes down once and then comes up. I plunge into the water. He has the stone in his hand. I scream at him, "Let the stone go and swim." He ignores me. I swim towards him and I grab his hair. A voice says, "Leave him to us." We both are pulled aboard. I see other boats hauling people from the water. We are brought ashore and left on the quay. Someone throws us blankets, and later 2 men approach us. They introduce themselves as a Mr. P.J. Kelly and a Mr. Doris, and they give us money for food. And they ask us if we want to go back to Achill, and we both say no. And while sitting there, we see bodies brought into a shed and covered with cloth. A constabulary boat arrives with a body. I look out at the sea, and I hear the humming silence of the sea as Owen had the day his father drowned. John Healy, part owner and captain of the Hooker Victory. As the brother says, it's a beautiful day to be sailing, and if they all do as he tells them, there will be no problem. And every now and then he shouts, "Remember to sit still." As Victory approaches Westport, Clew Bay has the June sunshine gleaming on 100 islets and on the white lighthouse that marks the entrance to Westport Harbour. The sea is glassy calm. The cone of Padraigh towers wreathed with cloud, and in the foreground are the tall warehouses and stores of Westport Quay, some gaunt and deserted. The Glasgow ship, the Elm, is anchored out a bit, waiting for the tide. The brother starts collecting the 6-penny fares, and most of the passengers are in the hold at this time. In total, I'm carrying 126 passengers. The young people are singing and waving. I roar at the brother to make sure they stay as they are and not to move no matter what. And when they see the Elm, pandemonium breaks out. Passengers rush from the hold and go to the side of the hooker next to the steamer to get a better view. I scream at them several times not to rush, but they are heedless. And at the same time, a little sharp squall comes the other side, and the sail strikes against the mast. And because the weight is all on that side, and the force of the wind too, suddenly we are all in the water. And when the sail strikes the water and gets wet, the hooker cannot right herself, and the sail keeps the people who are under it down. They have no chance. I make my escape by catching hold of the boom. A boat from the Glasgow steamer picks me up. Approaching Westport then, the young people observed the Elm. They became excited, left their seats, and the hooker capsized. And a sharp squall combined with the weight all on one side created the tragedy. 32 drowned on the day, 25 females and 7 males. The casualties would have been many more only for the heroic efforts of the crew of the Elm and some local boats. The Elm crew rescued 70 to 80 passengers. And at the inquest, thanks were expressed to Joseph McBride. Now, Joseph McBride would be a brother of Major John McBride, and he was elected an MP in 1918. To John Gibbons and Thomas Gibbons, and Michael O'Malley and Patrick Hopkins Jr., and William Burke, the great-grandfather of Tom Burke, the Towers, who so kindly is going to offer refreshments, Michael Moore and John Gibbons Peter. These are all local people at the quay who did their best to help the survivors. When researching, I discovered that there were actually 34 victims of the Clew Bay boating tragedy. And we must also not forget the melancholia that affected their parents and surviving siblings. One girl, Catherine Masterson, 24 years of age, from Shaheen's, Achill Sound, was brought ashore alive, but some 3 weeks later she died, it was said, and I quote, from immersion in the water. She was buried in the mass grave in Kildonnet. Michael David was on the island in July, visiting the homes of the victims, offering his consolation, and he attended Catherine's funeral. Catherine's name needs to be inscribed on the monument at the quay and on the headstone in Kildonnet graveyard in Achill. Westport leaders acted swiftly when news of the disaster reached the town. They rushed to the quay. They moved those needing medical assistance to the workhouse hospital. And immediately a collection of funds was organised in the town with an amazing 285 individual subscriptions collected in a few hours, a testament to the generosity and empathy of the Westport people. The money was used to buy proper coffins and shrouds and to assist survivors and their families. A mounted policeman was sent to Newport to persuade the engineer to allow a train to travel to Achill. The manager of the line, Mr. Tatley, would only allow a train to go to Newport because the track from Mulranny to Achill Sound had not been taken over by the Midland Great Western Railway Company yet. So people tended to travel by train as far as Mulranny and then took an outside car pulled by horse from Mulranny to Achill Sound. The engineer permitted a special train to travel on the line from Mulranny to Achill Sound. So the first part of Brian Rua's prophecy had come true. The first train to Achill thus carried the bodies of the Clew Bay drowning tragedy. Members of the hastily formed Westport Committee travelled on this special train to assist the families of the deceased. I would like to read the scene in Achill Sound when the train arrived with its tragic freight on that day. From 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, people from all parts of the island assembled about the telegraph office, inquiring as to the time the first bodies would arrive over the new railway line. Carts and cars carrying the wailing relatives 48 hours earlier to say goodbye to their loved ones. They keep repeating the last words they hear their children say on Thursday morning. My son promises he will bring home all the earnin. She tells her little 400 people are gathered. I send another constable over, not that there will be any trouble, as all are crying and keening. I am worried the crowd will make a mad rush on the appearance of the train in their frenzied state. I instruct my men to gently impress upon the crowd. The Franciscan brothers are present, consoling and advising the people. I erect a large black flag attached to a high pole near the spot where the train is to stop. The line is not open yet to traffic, and there is no regular station here for now. Many women wear large bands of white calico around their heads, for as one says, the purpose of preventing their heads from falling to pieces. And shortly after 2 o'clock, smoke is seen in the distance, and the yell that pierces the air makes my flesh creep. It is a yell echoing the hardships of their lives and their struggles to survive. It is a yell recognizing how their children have been sacrificed on the altar of necessity and desperation. It is a yell erupting like a volcano from the bowels of the landscape, as if the land of their island homes wishes to keen their loss too. I am there with my men now, and I observe strong men cry and women faint lifeless. I take the precaution of getting volunteers to help us control the crowd as the train approaches. The people begin to move closer and closer. I order my constables to take positions in order to make a rush impossible. Women are demanding the coffins be opened so that they may take one last look at the remains of their loved ones. The clergy have great difficulty in persuading them to drop this demand, and the priest points out that the bodies are dead since early Thursday and that the opening of the coffins will be dangerous. And when the engine stops, I shout to my men to brace themselves, and then the covered vans are opened, revealing 2 large heaps of plain deal coffins, each roped and having the name of the deceased within marked on the lid. Many people faint, and the doctor has his hands full. The engineer in charge of the line and his son superintend the unloading, and they're assisted by Messrs. Miles Stanton, John Lavelle, C.J. Kavanagh, and C. Patton Westport. And as the coffins are taken out, the name of the deceased is shouted, and relatives come forward to take charge of it. And Mr. P.J. Kelly, chairman of the Poor Law Guardians, Westport Union, hands each some monetary assistance from the relief fund. The coffin of Honor English was removed from the train at her home place in Rossturk. And this village, I would say, is about 13 or 14 miles from Kildownet graveyard. So I doubt very much that Honor is buried in the mass grave. At Tunragee, Mary Cooney's body was removed, and I also doubt that Mary is buried in Kildownet. The coffins were carried on carts to the cemetery. You can imagine this huge cortege of grief travelling along the narrow road to Kildownet. Women clung to the cartwheels, shouting out words of love to those silenced forever. Think of the trauma the families were experiencing. They were not allowed to hold grief healing wakes, because the wake in Ireland, was a psychological way of healing us when we were grieving, and it would maybe go on for 3 days. And they were not allowed that. The coffins weren't opened. They would have had at that time no photographs of their children. There would be no photographs on the walls of their houses because the walls were stone or mud or turf. The cabin might have had no window, it might have had no chimney. There would be no pictures of the children on the dresser because there was no dresser. Okay? Only bits of furniture. And there would be no pictures of their children in a bedroom because there was no bed. In many of the cabins, they slept on straw. So these parents and siblings had to carve the features of their children in their minds forever and ever. The priests did their best to console them, but they were beyond consolation. Mr. William Doris, proprietor of the Mayo News, who was elected an MP for the House of Commons in 1910, spent the 14th of June sending telegraphs around the world about the disaster. Money arrived in huge quantities for the welfare of the families. Michael David was adamant that no family should be given a lump sum, but instead he organised a system of annuities with an insurance company where each family received £10 a year for 7 years for each child lost, and this was paid every quarter, the quarterly payment being £2, 10 shillings. Owen O'Malley had 3 daughters drowned, so he would receive £30 per annum. And Anthony Weir had 2 children drowned, and he would receive £20 per annum. And when reading through this list, I discovered the 34th victim of this tragedy. This victim did not drown, but rather died psychologically. Today we would call what she experienced as post-traumatic stress disorder. I read that an annuity of £10 per annum was to be paid to a Mrs. Kilban, Achill Sound, for her daughter confined to a lunatic asylum in Scotland. And this annuity was to be paid, and I quote, until such time as the patient recovered. We will never know if this Kilban girl in the lunatic asylum ever recovered and returned home to Achill Sound, or did she eventually die after many years in this asylum. So picture for a moment what this young girl had experienced. And there she is, one moment singing and laughing with her friends, and the next moment struggling for her life in the water. And there she is standing on this strange quayside in Westport, with her clothes dripping wet, watching as the lifeless bodies of her friends are carried into sheds where the creel is now at the quay. And just consider that this Kilban girl continued on her journey to Scotland on board the Ellen because her family desperately needed her earnings to survive. And on her lonely, traumatized journey, her mind gave way and she plunged into a deep melancholia. So the history of the Clew Bay drowning disaster is incorrect. 32 drowned on the day, that's correct. But overall, 33 drowned because, Catherine Maslin died from immersion in the water. And the 34th victim, the Kilban girl, died psychologically. Many of the survivors continued on to Scotland. 160 travelled on the Ellen. They had no other alternative. They knew how desperately their families depended on them. And if they went home to Achill, how would their families survive? There would be no money to pay the seed rate. There would be no money to pay the landlord's many rents. There would be no money to pay the shopkeeper who gave them credit when the tatty-hoking money was spent. They had to continue on to Scotland. One has to admire their resilience in the face of adversity in their lives and their love for their families. Hookers were outside the law. The Board of Trade had nothing to do with small boats unless propelled by steam, and there was no legislation to cover them. An official of the Board of Trade said Healy's hooker was only built to carry 30. The verdict of the inquest proclaimed the tragedy was caused by passengers on board rushing to the side, that the hooker was not properly ballasted. Ballast should be in proportion to the number on board, and the hooker was grossly overcrowded. There was a huge emotional response worldwide to this tragedy. An Achill Improvement Fund was started with all the leading men and women in Ireland on the committee. The Mayor of Liverpool travelled to Achill with funds raised in Liverpool. Lady Aberdeen, the wife of the Lord Lieutenant, travelled with her industrial committee to see if local industries could be started. The first prophecy of Brian Rua O'Caravan had been fulfilled, and in 1937 the second part of the prophecy was completed. The very last train to Achill carried the bodies of the 10 Achill tatty-hookers burned to death in the bothy in Kirkintilloch. But the victims of the Clew Bay disaster, however, did not die in vain. Young mothers were dying regularly giving birth at this time in Achill. In 1 year, 15 young mothers died from puerperal fever, and it was such a disaster that the priest in Achill said he doesn't care what religion a nurse was as long as they got a nurse. The handy woman in the village, who was always called for births, often infected the mother-to-be, or the lack of domestic hygiene caused the infection. Cabins with no windows, cabins with earthen floors, cabins with a woman giving birth on straw, and they were, liable to this terrible infection. In fact, when the district nurse tending the mother washed her first and fumigated the house, the mother-to-be believed that she was actually going to die, and that the district nurse was preparing her for lying her overboard. Lady Dudley, who started a nursing scheme for poor isolated places, sent a district nurse to Achill to save the lives of mothers giving birth. Lady Dudley's nurses were to be funded by the local community, and this was fine in areas inhabited by wealthy gentry who raised funds by holding bazaars and garden fetes. However, in Achill, this wealthy class was not plentiful, and so the day came when there was a real danger that Achill would lose the district nurse. After paying for the annuities, there was money left over, and this money was now used to pay for the district nurse, who would continue to deliver new life healthily and save the lives of mothers during childbirth. So in a sense, out of their deaths came new life. And I would just look at the cover of my book, When the Heavens Deny, and this is the district nurse on her taxi, all right, going to her calls. And when this went up online, within 5 minutes, a message came from America saying, that's my grandfather. And then another message came saying, that's my great-grandfather. His name is Patrick Lynch. Now, I haven't heard the name Lynch too often in Achill, but I have heard the name Lynchon in Achill. And one of the victims in the tragedy was a Bridget Lynchon of 20 years of age. So maybe they took off the on and left it as Patrick Lynch. And they said they had the photograph in black and white, but they hadn't got it in colour. Okay? So, how should Achill respond to this tragedy today? And this may appear gaulish, but you are aware that Yeats' grave in Sligo is a major tourist attraction, and the grave of the rock singer Jim Morrison of the Doors is also a visitor's shrine in Paris. And you're also aware of the shrine to Elvis Presley in Graceland. And when I was researching my book, I visited Kildownet graveyard where the victims are buried, and I was shocked at the neglect of this grave and the grave of the Kirkintilloch 10. The railing around the Clew Bay disaster grave is rusted. The Achill Relief Committee in 1894 erected a very substantial wrought iron railing around the plot, and the contract was awarded to a Timothy Hoban from Newport. And I wonder, is that the same railing that is there now? And if it is 130 years old. The names on the headstone are faded. The access to the grave of the Kirkintilloch 10 is a feat in itself. It is a difficult task, with each step increasing the danger of a fall. These graves are a major part of the history of Achill. They represent the struggle to survive, the resilience and the courage of the Achill men and women. I would love to see these graves upgraded respectfully. I visualise a visitor centre there nearby with employment for 2 or 3 Achill residents. The centre would house all the exhibits revealing the social, economic and tragic history of the island. So this, in my view, is how Achill should respond. The Historical Graves project demands to be undertaken. It can be accomplished very easily and very quickly. And at present, the presentation of Kildownet Graveyard and these historic graves is shameful, to say the least. To finish, I would like to read a poem I wrote for the launch of Only the Stones Never Die in Achill's Sound Hotel. And the poem is part of my collection, Westport, A Blessing on the Soul, and it is titled, Don't Ever Forget. Don't ever forget. When every year you recycle your 1.3 million tons of food waste, that they ate potatoes of a cold earthen floor. Don't ever forget. When you behold seaweed litter your shore, that they ate the green berries and the dark green leaves on the black stems. because they had nothing else to eat. Don't ever forget when you lie on your Siberian feather pillow and you snuggle beneath your 13-tall duvet that they slept on wads of straw. Don't ever forget when you wished to downsize. They never had that problem, as they lived their lives in a one-room cabin and shared their space with the cow or the calf or the pig, and the landlord downsized them with evictions. Don't ever forget when you note the heather blooming on the mountainside, that they cut that heather to fashion brooms to sweep their earthen floors, and they were fined in court because the landlord owned all the heather growing wild. Don't ever forget when they established stones on the foreshore in the frantic hope seaweed might fasten to these stones and furnish them with fertilizer to grow their food. The landlord charged them stone rent because he owned the foreshore too. Don't ever forget they sailed to Scotland to pick potatoes, and their bedstead was an upturned potato box, and their mattress a bag of straw, and rats surrounded them, and the damp invaded their bones, and no one took the knee for them in the midst of the racist chants. Don't ever forget, we are shadows of shadows gone before us, and we are shadows for shadows still to come, and a family of shadows is in procession behind your back, and they have ushered you here as shadows of their resilience, honesty, integrity, and morality. They fought what life heaved at them and survived. Be proud of your lineage of shadows. Be grateful to them. Be inspired by them. And your shadows still to come will be inspired by you. I would like to thank Noreen and the library staff for asking me to speak here today. I would like to thank them for all their hard work on this commemoration. And it gives me, and it's a great privilege for me and a great honour for me to declare the Clew Bay boating disaster now open to the public. Thank you all for listening.